Have you ever wondered what happens when raw talent crashes into a world built on privilege? When he touched that piano, they laughed. Little did they know. He was about to change everything. Follow 13-year-old Elijah Carter, a self-taught piano prodigy from a tight-knit neighborhood on the east side of Charleston, South Carolina, as he navigates the gleaming corridors of Ashley Hall Preparatory Academy, a school where legacy matters more than passion, and family names carry more weight than dreams. When ridiculed by wealthy student Caroline Prescott with the words, "Don't touch what you can't replace," Elijah faces a defining choice: walk away humiliated or let his music speak louder than their prejudice. This story will leave you breathless and inspired. Elijah Carter's fingers moved like shadows across the scuffed keys of an old upright Baldwin at the John L. Davis Community Center. The piano, with its chipped ivory and muffled pedals, had once served a church congregation before being gifted to the center years ago. Now it was Elijah's escape. At 13, Elijah was small for his age, wiry but intense. His shoes were worn, his hoodie faded, but when he sat at that piano, the world outside faded too. He leaned in close, his body nearly wrapped around the instrument, coaxing fragments of Debussy's Clair de Lune from memory. There was no sheet music, just the dim light of a cracked phone screen resting on the piano's edge, playing a tutorial he'd replayed dozens of times. "Elijah," came a voice from the hallway. It was Mr. Frank, the custodian and part-time piano tuner who had taken a liking to the boy. "You keep at it like that, someone's gonna think you've got magic in them fingers." Elijah looked up, sheepish, almost got the second movement down. Frank walked over, rubbing his beard thoughtfully. "You're playing French Impressionist pieces without a teacher and half a keyboard. Lord knows what you'd do with a real piano." That night at home, the scent of his grandma's red beans and rice filled the air of their two-bedroom apartment in Liberty Heights. Elijah sat at the kitchen table, doodling chord shapes on a piece of loose leaf, while his younger sister, Ava, colored beside him. His grandmother watched him from the stove, her voice low but kind. "You get your mind on that music again?" He nodded. "Mr. Frank says I might get to visit that fancy school on the Battery." "Ashley Hall." Her brow lifted. "Ashley Hall? That the place where them politicians' kids go? Ain't that all uniforms and violins?" "They got Steinways, Grandma, real ones, and rooms just for practicing." His eyes gleamed. "Miss Kelly, my music teacher, sent a video of me playing." They wrote back. She turned off the burner and sat across from him, folding her hands over the table. "You got a gift, baby, ain't no doubt. But them folks over there, they live a whole different kind of life. Just don't let nobody make you feel small." Elijah didn't say much, but his heart swelled with hope and nerves. 2 days later, a yellow school bus rolled past Rainbow Row and into the gated campus of Ashley Hall Preparatory Academy. It was the kind of place Elijah had only seen in brochures and movies. Red brick buildings wrapped in ivy, fountains in the courtyards, iron lamps hanging from arched walkways. The other exchange students, mostly from Charleston's public schools, stepped off the bus, chatting nervously. Elijah held tight to his thin folder of printed sheet music, his palms damp. He wore his nicest polo, neatly tucked into pants his grandma had ironed that morning. His dress shoes pinched a bit. He'd outgrown them months ago, but they were all he had. "Welcome to Ashley Hall," said a tall woman in a navy blazer, greeting them at the gates. "We're so pleased to host your group today. You'll tour the campus, attend a student showcase, and meet some of our advanced music students." Elijah's group was led to the Music and Arts Center, a sleek white building lined with glass and adorned with the name Prescott Hall in shining brass letters. Inside, Elijah was immediately drawn to the grand piano stationed near the sunlit atrium. It was unlike anything he'd ever seen. A jet-black Steinway Model D concert grand, polished to perfection. He stepped forward slowly, his fingers twitching. "Don't even think about it." A sharp voice cut through the air. Startled, Elijah turned to see a girl about his age standing nearby. Blonde hair neatly curled, pearl earrings, and an expression like she was smelling something unpleasant. "I said don't touch that," she repeated, stepping closer. "That's a $140,000 Steinway. It's not a playground." "I was just looking," Elijah said, instinctively stepping back. "Sure you were," she said, her tone thick with sarcasm. "You one of the scholarship kids?" Elijah blinked, caught off guard. "I'm Caroline Prescott," she continued, lifting her chin. "My family paid for this entire wing. That piano has my name on it. Literally." Elijah glanced at the engraved plaque beside the bench. Donated by the Prescott family in honor of Caroline Ann Prescott. "I can play," he said, barely above a whisper. Caroline let out a short laugh, drawing attention from nearby students. "Oh, really? What? Twinkle, twinkle? Maybe chopsticks?" "I can play Debussy," Elijah said, his voice firmer now. That made a few students turn. Caroline smirked. "Well then, let's hear it." Elijah stood frozen, the weight of Caroline's challenge settling on his narrow shoulders. The students nearby had stopped whispering and turned toward him, eager for drama. He glanced around, unsure whether this was a trap or a genuine invitation. His heart pounded, not from fear, but from something deeper. A rising resolve that came from years of silent practice on chipped keys and second-hand rhythms. Slowly, deliberately, he stepped forward. "All right," he said, his voice calm but steady. He eased onto the bench like it belonged to him, hands hovering just above the keys. For a brief second he closed his eyes. The noisy hallway, the judgmental stares, the echo of Caroline's mocking tone. All of it faded as he drew on the memory of his quiet evenings at the community center, practicing until the custodian turned off the lights. His fingers found the opening chords of Clair de Lune, tentative at first, then fuller, more assured. The Steinway's touch was like silk, responsive in ways his old upright had never been. The notes blossomed from the instrument, each one luminous and aching. Conversations stopped. Footsteps halted. Even Caroline's expression shifted from amusement to uneasy disbelief. As Elijah moved into the piece's dreamy middle section, a hush settled over the atrium. Staff paused in doorways, a few faculty members emerged from the practice rooms, and more students gathered, drawn by the unexpected magic drifting from the piano. The contrast between the elegant surroundings and the boy with scuffed shoes and borrowed sheet music created a strange, beautiful tension. And still, he played, not for them, not to prove anything, but because he needed to. This was how he spoke. When the final notes dissolved into silence, no one moved at first. Then a few hesitant claps, then more. Soon, the entire atrium erupted into applause. One of the music teachers, a tall man in a gray vest and glasses, made his way through the crowd. "That was Debussy, correct?" he asked, nodding with interest. Elijah stood, unsure how to respond. "Yes, sir." "Self-taught?" "Yes, sir." The teacher looked genuinely impressed. "You have a rare ear. That was more than just accurate, it had heart." Caroline, still rooted in place, tried to regain control. "It was fine," she said coolly, though her voice lacked conviction. "But that doesn't mean he belongs here." A few of her friends murmured in agreement, but their tone was uncertain. The man in the vest turned to her. "And you are?" "Caroline Prescott. I'm the lead student pianist here. My recital's next month." He nodded politely. "I've heard of you. Your technique is exceptional." She smiled tightly. "Thank you." Then he turned back to Elijah. "Would you consider performing again? We have a faculty recital this Friday. It's informal, but students are invited to attend. It would give you a chance to play for our director, Dr. Ellison." Elijah looked startled. I don't know." "Think about it," the teacher said. "I'm Mr. Bennett. Let me know if you're interested." As he walked away, Elijah turned to find Caroline still glaring at him. "That was a lucky moment," she said, her tone clipped. "Don't get used to it." Elijah didn't respond. His body was still buzzing with the sensation of playing the Steinway. He didn't need to argue. The music had already spoken. When he returned home that evening, his grandmother noticed the change in him. He moved with a quiet confidence, his shoulders a little higher, his steps a little firmer. "You all right, baby?" she asked, stirring sweet potatoes on the stove. "I played," he said simply. "On a real grand piano. They asked me to come back Friday." She paused, then gave him a long look, eyes softening. "Well then, we'd better find you something sharper to wear." On Friday, Elijah returned to Ashley Hall, this time in a second-hand blazer from a neighbor down the hall. It was a little big in the shoulders, but he wore it proudly. Mr. Bennett greeted him at the door of the recital hall, a cozy space lined with velvet chairs and oil paintings of former faculty. A few dozen people were already seated, teachers, students, and some parents. Caroline was near the front, dressed in a stunning black blouse, her hair twisted into an elegant knot. She saw him and gave a brief nod, neither warm nor hostile. Mr. Bennett introduced Elijah as a promising young pianist from the community, and then stepped aside. Elijah approached the piano, heart thudding in his chest. This time, he chose something different. Chopin's Nocturne in E minor. He'd heard it only a few times but had studied the phrasing by ear, using slow-motion videos and hours of listening to capture its nuances. As he played, the room fell into the same stunned silence he'd experienced earlier in the week. The music was soft, intimate, yet filled with a kind of longing that tugged at every listener's chest. He didn't play it perfectly. He missed a pedal shift and clipped a high note. But it didn't matter. His connection to the music was raw and undeniable. When he finished, the applause was more than polite. It was admiring. Even Dr. Ellison, the Academy's head of music, stood at the back, nodding thoughtfully. Afterward, as refreshments were served in the lobby, Dr. Ellison approached Elijah and Mr. Bennett. "That boy has something rare," she said. "If he's not already auditioning, he should be." Mr. Bennett turned to Elijah. "Would you consider applying here next semester?" Elijah's eyes widened. I don't know how we'd afford it." "We offer scholarships," Dr. Ellison said gently. "And we make room for talent, like yours." Behind them, Caroline stood quietly, arms folded. She'd played flawlessly that night too, but the conversation wasn't about her. It wasn't bitterness that clouded her face now, but something more complicated. Resentment tangled with confusion and perhaps a reluctant spark of respect. As Elijah and his grandmother drove home that night, he stared out the window, his mind racing. He had always dreamed of a place where music was more than just a secret passion, where it could be his future. And now that future didn't seem so far away. The following Monday, Elijah returned to Roosevelt Middle with something new in his step. Pride. Not arrogance, but a quiet, anchored kind of pride that came from being seen, from being heard, not just by those who knew his struggle, but by people who had once looked through him. He was back in his regular clothes, carrying the same battered folder of sheet music, but something inside had changed. He spent his lunch break in the music room where Miss Kelly greeted him with a broad smile and tearful eyes. "They called me," she said, voice trembling. "Ashley Hall, they want you to audition. They said the board was moved by your playing. Elijah—" She paused, shaking her head in amazement. "You've cracked something open." Elijah nodded. He didn't have the words to explain how surreal it all felt, like stepping into someone else's dream. At home, the letter arrived by Thursday. Ashley Hall officially invited Elijah to audition for the upcoming academic year, noting that full scholarship consideration would be given. His grandmother read it 3 times aloud before she looked at him and simply said, "See, baby. Sometimes it don't matter where you come from. It's what you carry with you that counts." The news spread quickly in his neighborhood. Miss Thelma at the community center brought him extra snacks. Mr. Frank sat with him an extra hour every night to work on dynamics and posture. Even the barber down the street offered him a free cut before the big day. But not everyone welcomed the news. On the day of the audition, as Elijah walked onto the Ashley Hall campus in a clean shirt and slacks that fit him well, Caroline Prescott watched from a distance. Her expression was unreadable. Since the recital, she'd kept her distance. During rehearsals for the upcoming winter performance, she practiced longer than usual, her fingers moving over Liszt and Rachmaninoff with surgical precision. But something had shifted. For the first time, she wasn't the only name people whispered about in the music wing. It was Elijah's name now that carried surprise, excitement, and something she couldn't quite name. Envy, perhaps, but mixed with a reluctant kind of respect. Elijah's audition was scheduled for late afternoon in the formal recital hall. Dr. Ellison and 3 other faculty members sat at a long table, clipboards ready. Elijah took the bench, inhaled deeply, and placed his fingers over the keys. He began with the piece he knew best, Chopin's Nocturne in E minor, but added more color, more breath, more risk than he ever had before. Then he shifted into a Bach invention, a piece he'd only recently taught himself by ear, and though it lacked textbook perfection, it carried life and curiosity. He ended with a blues improvisation, something entirely his own, letting his fingers tell a story no one else could. When he finished, there was no applause, just the quiet rustle of notes being scribbled. Dr. Ellison finally looked up. "Thank you, Elijah. We'll be in touch very soon." He stepped outside into the crisp Charleston air and spotted Caroline leaning against a column. She wasn't dressed in her usual polished uniform, just jeans and a hoodie with her hair in a messy bun. "That was pretty good," she said flatly. Elijah blinked. "Thanks." She didn't move. "I've been playing since I was 4, she said, voice low. "My dad flew me to Boston for master classes. I've performed at Carnegie's Youth Series. I know what it takes to be good." Elijah didn't say anything. "But when you play," she continued, eyes narrowing slightly, "it's like you're not trying to be impressive. You just feel everything. That's what gets people." Elijah shifted his weight. "I'm not trying to beat anyone. I just want to play." Caroline looked at him then. Really looked. "You're not what I expected." "Neither are you," he replied. The official acceptance came the following week, delivered in a crisp white envelope sealed with gold. Full scholarship, full tuition, music supplies, mentorship, and even a transportation stipend. Elijah stared at the letter, heart pounding so loud he could barely hear his grandmother crying with joy behind him. When he arrived for his first day at Ashley Hall that spring, he felt the familiar tug of uncertainty, the polished shoes, the marble hallways, the voices echoing through places that had never belonged to him. But he was here now, and not by accident. He was paired with Caroline for a duet at the upcoming Spring Gala, Mozart's Sonata for 2 pianos in D major. The news surprised them both. Dr. Ellison's note said simply, "There is value in contrast. Let your differences shape something beautiful." Rehearsals began stiffly. Caroline was methodical, brilliant, exacting. Elijah was fluid, intuitive, spontaneous. At first, their sessions were strained, filled with quiet corrections and occasional frustration. But slowly, they began to listen to each other. Caroline started leaving more space in her phrasing, allowing Elijah's improvisational instincts to breathe. Elijah began focusing more on rhythm, discipline, and clean technique. Their styles didn't blend. They danced. The night of the gala, the performance hall shimmered with warm light and murmurs of Charleston's elite. Elijah stood backstage, his palms damp. Caroline joined him, smoothing the skirt of her elegant burgundy dress. "You ready?" she asked. "Yeah," he said. "You?" "Almost," she replied, then glanced at him. "Don't forget to breathe." When they took the stage, the room quieted. Their four hands met the keys in unison, the opening of Mozart's sonata leaping to life. It was joyous, light, but with depth. A conversation between two people who had once stood on opposite sides of the room. They finished to a standing ovation. Elijah scanned the audience and saw his grandmother standing proudly, dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief. He saw Mr. Frank, Mr. Bennett, Miss Kelly, and he saw Caroline's parents, seated near the front, clapping politely, but clearly surprised. Afterward, as the crowd mingled, Dr. Ellison approached them. "That," she said softly, "was the sound of possibility." Caroline smiled, then nudged Elijah. "Still think you don't belong here?" Elijah smiled back. "I think I belong wherever the music lives." Caroline nodded. "Then I guess you're home." "Dear friend, some pianos are locked behind glass doors, and some talents grow in silence. But sometimes, when the right hands meet the right moment, everything changes." Elijah's story reminds us that what's in your heart matters more than what's in your wallet, and that true music, the kind that moves people, doesn't care about zip codes. If this story touched you, share it. Let it remind others that brilliance can come from anywhere and that kindness, humility, and courage are louder than any applause. A young boy sitting in a crowded courtroom suddenly raises his hand and points directly at a decorated police officer. His next words send shockwaves through the room, unraveling a truth no one saw coming. What was supposed to be a routine trial takes an unexpected turn, exposing a hidden corruption that could shake the entire justice system. What did the boy reveal? Stay with us to find out, and let us know in the comments where you're watching this story unfold. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. The grand wooden chamber of the Chicago Criminal Court was packed. Reporters, legal observers, and members of the public sat shoulder to shoulder, eager to witness the fate of Daniel Grayson, a 28-year-old black handyman from Southside Chicago. He sat at the defendant's table, hands clasped tightly, his expression a mixture of exhaustion and quiet desperation. Daniel had been accused of a violent mugging that left Eleanor McCarthy, an elderly woman, hospitalized with broken ribs and a stolen purse. The prosecution had built a convincing case. Surveillance footage from a blurry street camera, a witness who claimed to have seen a man running away, and Daniel's past financial struggles, all painting him as the perfect suspect. He was a black man from a working-class neighborhood, and to many in the system, that was enough. The prosecutor, a confident and well-groomed man named Richard Colton, made sure the jury saw not a struggling worker trying to make ends meet, but a dangerous criminal. His voice rang with certainty as he outlined the charges, describing Daniel as someone desperate enough to turn to violence. Sitting in the back row, Angela Peterson, a grocery store owner in her mid-30s, shifted uncomfortably in her seat. She hadn't wanted to be here. She hadn't actually seen the crime, only glimpsed shadows moving outside her store window. But she had been called to testify. Beside her, her 5-year-old son Noah played quietly with a small toy truck, his little fingers guiding it along the wooden bench. The judge, an older woman with a firm but fair demeanor, tapped her gavel and called for order. Just then, a side door opened, and several Chicago Police Department officers entered the room. They moved with authority, their presence a reminder of the law's power. Among them stood Lieutenant Marcus Holt, a broad-shouldered, decorated officer with a reputation for keeping the streets clean. Lieutenant Holt was respected, even feared. He had solved major cases, taken down dangerous criminals, and was known for his no-nonsense approach to justice. He was also a white officer in a system that had long been accused of disproportionately targeting black men. To the jury, his presence signaled security, reassurance that the right person was in custody. Noah, who had been focused on his toy, suddenly stopped. His fingers loosened, and the truck tumbled to the floor with a soft clatter. Angela turned to him, surprised, but his small face had gone pale, his brown eyes fixed on Lieutenant Holt. The courtroom carried on, lawyers debating, the jury listening. But Noah was no longer a passive observer. A small breath hitched in his throat, then in a voice clear and unwavering, he spoke. "I saw him." The words sliced through the air, silencing the courtroom. Heads turned, searching for the source of the voice. The judge hesitated, eyes scanning the room until she found the little boy, his small hand now pointing directly at Lieutenant Holt. "He was there," Noah said. Angela's breath caught. She felt a cold wave wash over her as she turned to her son. "Noah, what are you talking about?" she whispered, gripping his shoulders. But the boy didn't waver. For the first time that day, Daniel Grayson lifted his head. His lawyer stopped mid-sentence. The prosecutor, who had been flipping through his notes, froze. The officers near Holt exchanged glances, their trained eyes reading every subtle cue in his stance. Lieutenant Holt remained motionless. His face didn't change, but those who looked closely saw the subtle tightening of his jaw, the flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. The silence in the courtroom stretched unbearably long. Then, Holt took a single step backward, a barely perceptible movement, but to those watching, it was unmistakable. A retreat. The judge tapped her gavel, breaking the eerie quiet. "We will take a short recess." Chaos erupted. Lawyers whispered hurriedly. The press scrambled, typing furiously. Spectators murmured, trying to process what had just happened. As the courtroom emptied for recess, Angela clutched Noah's hand. She hadn't understood what had just happened, but something about the way Holt had stepped back sent an undeniable chill down her spine. Minutes later, a court official approached Angela, asking her to step into a side consultation room with her son. She hesitated, but before she could refuse, the prosecutor, Richard Colton, appeared. His sharp eyes flickered toward Noah. "I'd like to speak with both of you." Angela's first instinct was to refuse, to take her son and leave. But something inside her, the fear in her gut, the way the officers had looked at Holt, made her nod. Inside a dimly lit office, they sat across from Colton. Noah clutched his toy truck, his small fingers wrapped tightly around it. The prosecutor exhaled through his nose, tapping his fingers against the desk as he studied the boy. "Noah," he began, his voice measured. "Can you tell me what you saw?" Noah glanced at his mother as if seeking approval. Angela, her pulse pounding, gave him a small nod. "I saw him that night," Noah said simply. "By Mommy's store." Colton leaned forward slightly. "You mean the night of the attack?" Noah nodded. The prosecutor frowned. What was he doing? Noah's small brows furrowed as he tried to recall. He was by the alley. There was a car, a black one. He was talking to someone. Then he got in and drove away. Angela's breath caught in her throat. She had seen a car that night too. a sleek black vehicle idling for a few minutes before vanishing. She had assumed it was just another late-night customer. But now… Colton's expression hardened. He turned to his assistant. "Pull up the surveillance footage from near the store." Minutes later, in a small office filled with flickering screens, they watched grainy nighttime footage. A black car rolled into view, parking near the alley beside Angela's store. The timestamp matched the time of the attack on Eleanor McCarthy. Angela gripped Noah's hand. "That's the car," he whispered. They watched as a tall figure stepped out. The footage was blurry, but the way he moved, his posture, it was eerily familiar. The man spoke to someone in the shadows, gestured with his hands. Less than a minute later, he got back into the car and drove away. Colton's face was unreadable. He turned to his assistant. "Do we have a plate number?" She hesitated. "The quality isn't great, but we're enhancing it." Angela felt her chest tighten. This wasn't a coincidence anymore. Then the assistant spoke again, more hesitantly this time. "There's another camera angle from closer to the alley. If we can access it, we might get a clearer shot of his face." Colton nodded. "Pull whatever you can. I want answers by tonight." Angela looked down at Noah, who was staring at the frozen image on the screen. His little hands trembled slightly, but his face remained steady. Colton turned to her. "Angela, I need you to be completely honest with me." His voice was calm, but firm. "Have you ever seen Lieutenant Holt near your store before?" Angela hesitated. Had she? Then she remembered. Months ago, on a quiet evening, a black car had idled across the street. She'd noticed it because it lingered just a little too long. At the time, she hadn't thought anything of it. Her stomach twisted. "I don't know," she admitted. "But now, I think I might have." Colton exhaled through his nose. If Holt was there that night, if he was involved, this changes everything. Angela's fingers tightened around Noah's. His small voice whispered beside her. "Told you, Mama." On the screen, the image of the black car remained frozen in time. Angela's heart pounded as she sat in the small office, gripping Noah's hand tightly. The weight of what her son had just revealed settled heavily on her chest. Lieutenant Marcus Holt, a respected cop, a man trusted to uphold justice, had been near the crime scene on the night of the attack. And Noah had seen him. The prosecutor, Richard Colton, exhaled slowly, his fingers drumming against the desk as he processed the information. If he was there, if he was involved, he said, choosing his words carefully. This could mean Daniel Grayson is innocent. Angela swallowed hard. The thought made her stomach twist. An innocent black man was sitting in that courtroom, fighting for his life, while the real culprit might have been the very man meant to protect the city. Colton's assistant returned, her face tight with urgency. "We pulled the closer camera footage," she said, setting a laptop on the desk and clicking through the files. The grainy black and white video played on the screen. The same black car rolled into the frame, its sleek surface gleaming under the dim streetlights. The timestamp matched the time of the attack. Then, the driver's side door opened. A tall, broad-shouldered man stepped out. The resolution wasn't perfect, but the face that turned toward the camera was unmistakable. Holt. The room fell silent. Angela felt her breath catch. Colton's jaw clenched as he leaned in, studying the footage frame by frame. "Jesus," he muttered. His assistant spoke again, hesitant. "There's more. We checked his financial records." She clicked a few more times, pulling up a separate file. A series of offshore transactions, payments funneled through shell companies, all linking back to Holt. Colton's fingers tightened into fists. "It's not just one case," he said, his voice low. "He's been doing this for years." Angela's mind raced. How many people had been falsely accused? How many innocent men had lost their freedom because of him? Noah, still staring at the laptop screen, whispered, "Mama, what happens now?" Angela forced herself to stay calm. "We're going to tell the truth, baby," she said, brushing a hand over his curls. Colton stood abruptly. "We need to move fast," he said. "If Holt realizes people are looking into him, this could get dangerous." He turned to Angela, his eyes sharp with concern. "I want you and Noah somewhere safe, now." Angela hesitated, but the urgency in his voice left no room for doubt. Colton called over an officer to escort them home while his team prepared to present the new evidence in court. Angela bundled Noah into the back seat of a police car, the weight of the situation pressing down on her. As they pulled away from the courthouse, she noticed her hands trembling. This wasn't just about Daniel Grayson anymore. This was about Holt, about the system that allowed men like him to thrive. Noah, despite his young age, seemed to understand the gravity of it all. He clutched his toy truck but said nothing, his wide brown eyes scanning the world outside the window. The streets of Chicago passed in a blur. The squad car turned onto her block, stopping outside her house. The officer in the front seat turned to her. "Stay inside. Keep the doors locked. We'll have someone outside." Angela nodded. She carried Noah into the house, bolting the door behind her. The weight of exhaustion hit her all at once, but she knew sleep wasn't an option. Hours passed. The house was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the old floorboards. Noah had fallen asleep on the couch, curled up with his toy. Angela sat by the window, staring out at the police car parked on the curb. Then, something shifted. A dark sedan, its headlights off, rolled slowly down the street. Angela's breath caught in her throat. The car didn't stop, didn't speed up, just coasted past, deliberate, like someone was watching. Her pulse hammered. Was it Holt? Was he already onto them? The squad car outside didn't react. Either they hadn't noticed or didn't think anything of it. Angela's gut told her otherwise. She reached for her phone, her fingers shaking as she dialed. Colton answered on the second ring. "Angela?" "Someone just drove by my house," she whispered. No headlights. It felt wrong. The line was quiet for a beat. Then Colton's voice hardened. "Pack a bag, now." Angela moved quickly, her mind racing. She threw essentials into a backpack, grabbed important documents, cash, anything she might need if they had to leave in a hurry. She knelt by the couch, shaking Noah gently. "Baby, wake up," she whispered. His sleepy eyes fluttered open. "We have to go." Noah sat up, groggy but obedient. Angela pulled him into her arms, her heart hammering. She peeked out the window. The squad car was still there, but the dark sedan was gone. For now. A sharp knock at the door made her jump. Angela hesitated, her fingers tightening around Noah's wrist. "Angela, it's me," came a familiar voice. The officer from outside. She exhaled shakily and opened the door. He stood there, his face tense. "We're moving you," he said. "Colton's orders." Angela nodded and grabbed the backpack. She scooped Noah up and followed the officer out. The night air felt thick, charged. She slid into the back seat of the squad car, Noah tucked against her side. The officer started the engine, pulling away from the house. Angela forced herself to breathe, but her instincts screamed that they weren't safe yet. As they turned onto a busier street, headlights flashed behind them. Angela's stomach clenched. A car, dark and unmarked, was following them. "We have a tail," the officer muttered, his grip tightening on the wheel. Angela's pulse pounded. "Is it him?" The officer didn't answer. He picked up the radio. "Dispatch. We need backup. Now." The voice on the other end crackled in response, but before they could get a location, the dark car behind them suddenly accelerated. It swerved, trying to cut them off. The officer cursed under his breath, swerving hard to avoid it. Angela clutched Noah as the car lurched. "Hold on!" the officer barked. Tires screeched. The unmarked car tried again, forcing them toward a side street. Angela's breath came in short gasps. If they got boxed in, they wouldn't stand a chance. Then sirens. Flashing red and blue lights erupted behind them. A second police unit tore down the street, engines roaring. The dark sedan immediately veered off, disappearing down a side alley. The squad car skidded to a stop, and the officer exhaled sharply. "You okay?" he asked, glancing at Angela through the rearview mirror. She nodded, though her heart was still hammering. Noah, silent but alert, clung to her. The radio crackled. Suspect vehicle last seen heading southbound. Officers in pursuit. The officer tightened his grip on the wheel. "We're taking you somewhere safe," he said. Angela swallowed hard. She knew what he meant. If Holt was willing to chase them down, he was getting desperate. And desperate men were dangerous. They drove for what felt like forever, weaving through the city, making sure they weren't being followed. Finally, they pulled into the parking garage of an unmarked government building. Angela carried Noah inside, her nerves still raw. Colton was waiting for them. "You're staying here until we get him," he said firmly. Angela's throat felt dry. "How close is he?" Colton's face was grim. "Too close." He exhaled sharply. "But we're going to put him away. I promise." Angela nodded, but the fear in her gut remained. This wasn't over. Not yet. Angela sat in the dimly lit government safe house, her nerves raw as she clutched Noah close. The walls were plain, the air thick with tension. Colton paced nearby, his phone pressed against his ear, his voice low and urgent. Outside, officers stood guard, their presence a silent reminder that the danger hadn't passed. Angela knew they were safe for the moment, but the weight of the situation pressed down on her like an iron grip. Lieutenant Holt was still out there. He knew they had seen the footage. He knew they were a threat. And men like him didn't run. They eliminated problems. Noah shifted against her side, his small fingers gripping her sleeve. "Mama, is the bad man coming?" His voice was barely a whisper. Angela swallowed the lump in her throat and stroked his curls. "No, baby. We're safe." But even as she said it, she wasn't sure if it was true. Colton ended his call and turned to them, his expression grim. "We've issued an arrest warrant," he said, his jaw tight. "We've got units looking for him, but—" He hesitated, rubbing his temple. "He's smart. He knows how we operate. He's staying ahead of us." Angela's stomach twisted. "What does that mean for us?" Colton exhaled sharply. "It means we stay put until we find him. I don't want you or Noah anywhere near the public until this is over." Angela nodded, but dread pooled in her stomach. Waiting felt like the worst possible option. Hours passed. The room felt smaller with each tick of the clock. Angela tried to keep Noah occupied, letting him play with his toy truck. But the weight of what had happened still hung in the air. She knew she wouldn't sleep. Every noise made her tense. Every footstep in the hallway sent her pulse racing. She wasn't sure how much time had passed when Colton's phone rang again. He answered immediately, his expression shifting as he listened. Then his eyes snapped to Angela. "We found his car." Her breath caught. "Where?" "Abandoned near the train yards on the south side." Angela's heart pounded. "Does that mean he's leaving the city?" Colton's jaw tightened. "Maybe. Or maybe he's setting something up." Angela's mind raced. Holt was a seasoned cop. He wasn't just running, he was planning. Colton seemed to have the same thought. He turned to one of the officers outside the door. I want all units doubled around this building. No one in or out without my say." The officer nodded and disappeared down the hallway. Colton ran a hand through his hair. "Angela, I need you to be completely honest with me. Is there anywhere at all that Holt might think to find you?" Angela hesitated, her thoughts scrambling. "I don't know. I mean, he knows where I live. He knows my store." Then, a chilling realization hit her. "My sister." Colton's eyes darkened. "Does she know what's going on?" "I called her before we left," Angela said, panic creeping into her voice. "I told her we were coming over, but then everything happened so fast, I never followed up." Colton didn't hesitate. He turned to his assistant. "Get a unit to her house, now." The minutes stretched unbearably long. Angela gripped her phone, her breath shallow, waiting for a call, a text, anything to confirm her sister was okay. Then finally, Colton's phone rang again. He answered instantly. Angela watched his face, searching for any sign of relief, but what she saw made her stomach drop. He closed his eyes briefly before looking at her. "She's not picking up." Angela felt the blood drain from her face. "Oh my God," Colton motioned to one of his officers. "Get a team to that address now. I want a full perimeter." The officer nodded and rushed out. Angela felt her chest tighten. She knew her sister. If she wasn't answering, something was wrong. Colton's radio crackled. "Sir, we've got movement at the location. Unmarked vehicle parked outside the residence. No sign of forced entry, but curtains are drawn. Possible hostage situation." Angela's knees nearly buckled. "Hostage?" The officer's voice continued. "We're holding position, waiting on your call." Colton didn't hesitate. "Go in. Now." The radio went silent, then a burst of static. "Moving in." Angela gripped Noah tighter, every second stretching into eternity. Then finally, "Suspect is down. Repeat, suspect is down. Hostage is safe." Angela's legs gave out and she sank onto the couch. Relief flooded her, but it was tangled with something deeper. Holt was down, but this wasn't over, not really. Colton put a hand on her shoulder. "He won't hurt you or Noah again," he said, his voice steady. Angela nodded, but her mind was already racing. If Holt had been doing this for years, how many other victims were out there? How many others had been framed, just like Daniel Grayson? "What happens to Daniel?" she asked, her voice hoarse. Colton straightened. "We're getting him out. The charges will be dropped. And then we start digging every case Holt was involved in, every conviction, every piece of evidence." The wheels of justice moved slowly, but this time, Angela knew they wouldn't stop. Days later, she stood outside the courthouse, watching as Daniel Grayson walked free, blinking against the bright Chicago sunlight. Reporters swarmed, cameras flashed, but he barely seemed to notice. He turned, meeting Angela's eyes. A silent understanding passed between them. She had helped save him. But in a way, Noah had saved them all. Angela knelt beside her son, brushing his curls back. "You did something brave, baby." Noah looked up at her, his small fingers still clutching his toy truck. "Did we stop the bad guy?" Angela smiled, her eyes damp. "Yes, baby. We did." A young black boy simply wanted to deposit money into his account, but instead of being served like any other customer, he was met with suspicion, scrutiny, and humiliation in front of everyone. The bank employees exchanged malicious glances, whispered among themselves, and quickly concluded that a black boy could not possibly own such a sum of money legally. They believed they had the right to judge, to decide that he didn't belong there. But they were wrong, because the boy they had just refused to serve was the son of the bank's CEO, and in just a few minutes, They would have to face the consequences of the discrimination they thought would go unnoticed. Jaden Carter adjusted the straps on his backpack as he stepped into the grand lobby of Jefferson National Bank in Chicago. He had been here before, but always with his mother, Charlotte Carter, who was usually greeted by handshakes and warm smiles from the staff. Today, however, he was alone, and no one paid him any attention. Jaden had just turned 12 years old, and today was special. He had saved up $4,500 from his math scholarship and birthday gifts, a fortune for a kid his age. His mother, a firm believer in financial literacy, had taught him the importance of managing money early. He wanted to deposit his savings into his own account, just like any responsible person would. Dressed in a plain navy hoodie, jeans, and sneakers, Jaden blended in with the bustling city crowd. He didn't carry designer labels or wear expensive jewelry, and to the tellers behind the counters, he was just another black kid with a backpack. He stood in line, gripping the envelope of money tightly in his hands, waiting for his turn. The line moved slowly. Jaden glanced around, observing how the bank employees treated different customers. An older white businessman in a sharp gray suit had barely stepped inside before a teller rushed over, shaking his hand and leading him to a private lounge. Not a single question asked. Meanwhile, a Hispanic man in a work uniform was at the counter, fumbling with papers as the teller grilled him about his ID, proof of employment, and social security number. Things Jaden knew weren't standard questions for simple transactions. His stomach tightened. He had attended financial events with his mother where people spoke about equal access to banking, but what he was witnessing now didn't feel fair. After waiting nearly 40 minutes, it was finally his turn. He stepped up to the counter where a teller named Lisa sat, her expression immediately shifting from neutral to skeptical as she scanned him up and down. "Uh-huh," she muttered, eyeing the thick envelope in his hands. "What can I do for you?" Jaden smiled politely, placing the envelope on the counter. "I'd like to deposit this into my savings account." Lisa didn't move. Instead, she narrowed her eyes at the cash. "Where did you get this money?" Jaden blinked. That wasn't the usual greeting he had seen given to the businessman or the middle-aged couple before him. "I got a scholarship," he explained, "and some birthday money." Lisa glanced toward the senior teller, Andrew, who was working at the next station. She didn't say anything, but her raised eyebrows spoke volumes. Andrew, a man in his mid-30s with slicked back hair and a Rolex, walked over, folding his arms across his chest. "This seems like a lot of money for you," he said, his voice slow and deliberate. "You sure this is yours?" Jaden felt a wave of discomfort rise in his chest. "Yes," he said firmly. "I have an account here." Andrew let out a soft scoff and turned back to Lisa, as if discussing him like he wasn't even standing there. "Could be someone's running money through him," he muttered. "You know how it is." Jaden clenched his fists. He understood exactly what Andrew was implying. Lisa tapped at her keyboard and frowned at the screen. "We're gonna need documentation," she announced, her voice louder than necessary. "Proof of where this money came from." Jaden's patience started to thin. He had seen multiple customers deposit cash without being asked a single question. "I just told you," he said, keeping his voice steady. "It's scholarship money and birthday gifts. My name is on the account. You can check." Andrew exchanged a knowing smirk with Lisa before straightening up. "Well, we have the right to refuse service if we find anything suspicious," he said, tilting his head. "And this looks suspicious." Jaden inhaled sharply. He had heard about things like this happening. He had seen stories about people being denied service at banks because of how they looked, but he never thought he'd experience it firsthand, especially not at the very bank his mother ran. A few people in the line behind him shifted uncomfortably. A woman in a navy dress frowned but said nothing. An older man, likely a postal worker, crossed his arms, watching closely. Lisa slid the envelope back toward Jaden. You should try a place that handles cash transactions, maybe one of those check cashing places. Jaden felt heat rise to his face. She wasn't just questioning his money. She was questioning his right to be there. Why? He asked, his voice sharp. Why do I have to go somewhere else? Andrew smirked. Because this is Jefferson National Bank, kid. We have standards. Jaden's fingers tightened around his phone in his hoodie pocket. He had been hoping to do this the normal way. To be independent, just as his mother had taught him. But now, he realized they weren't going to let that happen. Taking a deep breath, he pulled out his phone and scrolled to his mother's contact. He pressed call. As the phone rang, he locked eyes with Andrew. I'm calling my mom. Andrew chuckled. Yeah? And who's she gonna call? Your teacher? Jaden didn't answer. On the third ring, his mother picked up. Hey, sweetheart. Charlotte's voice came through. How's it going? Jaden turned the speaker on. Mom, he said, loud enough for everyone around to hear. I'm at the bank, and they won't let me deposit my money. A beat of silence. Then, her tone shifted. Which branch? She asked, her voice low and dangerous. The main one downtown, he said. Andrew's smirk faltered. He was starting to realize this wasn't just a bluff. Then Charlotte spoke again, this time sharp as steel. Put me on with whoever's in charge. Right now. Jaden handed the phone to Lisa, who hesitated before taking it like it might burn her fingers. Hello? On the other end, Charlotte Carter's voice was calm, but lethal. This is Charlotte Carter, CEO of Jefferson National Bank. Who am I speaking to? Lisa went pale. Andrew visibly swallowed. The customers waiting in line leaned in, sensing the sudden shift in the air. Lisa opened her mouth, but no words came out. Andrew took a step back, his arms unfolding. Charlotte continued, her voice unwavering. My son is standing in your bank, trying to deposit his own money into his own account, and you're denying him service? Lisa stammered. I didn't know he was your son. A pause. Then Charlotte's voice cut through like a blade. And what if he wasn't? Lisa's face turned ashen as she clutched the phone, her fingers tightening around it as if she could somehow escape the weight of the conversation. The bank lobby, which had been buzzing with quiet chatter just moments before, fell into a tense silence. A few customers had paused their own transactions, their eyes flicking toward the unfolding scene with a mix of curiosity and discomfort. Jaden, standing firm, watched as Lisa scrambled for a response. I didn't mean, she stammered, glancing at Andrew, who now looked as if he'd rather be anywhere else. But Charlotte's voice remained firm on the other end of the line. You didn't mean what exactly? She asked, her tone deceptively calm. You didn't mean to assume my son couldn't have that amount of money? Or you didn't mean to let your bias dictate how you treat a customer? Lisa swallowed hard, her eyes darting around the room, desperate for an escape. But there was none. The reality of the situation had set in, and the authority she had wielded so easily over Jaden just moments ago had evaporated. Meanwhile, Andrew shifted uncomfortably, his usual air of superiority slipping away as his mind no doubt scrambled for a way to distance himself from the disaster unfolding. Charlotte continued, unrelenting. I want the branch manager on the phone. Now. Lisa hesitated, but Charlotte's tone left no room for negotiation. Or should I just come down there myself? At that, Lisa practically jumped from her seat, fumbling to pass the phone to the woman standing a few feet away. Sarah Whitmore, the branch manager, a woman in her late 40s with perfectly styled blonde hair and a navy blue pantsuit that screamed authority. Up until that moment, she had been watching the entire situation unfold with a detached interest, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. But now, her face tightened as she took the phone, her knuckles whitening as she held it to her ear. "Mrs. Carter," she greeted smoothly, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "This is Sarah Whitmore, branch manager. You denied my son's service." Charlotte's voice cut straight to the point. "Mrs. Carter, I assure you, this is all just a misunderstanding," Sarah began, her voice dripping with artificial politeness. "We have certain protocols in place to prevent fraud, and when a minor comes in with a large sum of money—" "My son has an account with your bank," Charlotte interrupted, her patience razor-thin. "He provided his information. He followed the same process as any other customer. The only difference is the way he looks." Sarah's grip on the phone tightened. "Mrs. Carter, please understand, we have to take extra precautions with cash deposits to prevent money laundering." "Tell me," Charlotte said slowly, deliberately, "did you ask the white businessman in the gray suit where his money came from?" Sarah didn't answer. The silence was enough of an answer. "I will be at the branch in 10 minutes, Charlotte continued, her voice sending a chill down Sarah's spine. "And I expect to see you, your senior staff, and security footage of the last 2 hours of transactions. I want to see exactly how you prevent fraud." Sarah opened her mouth, perhaps to argue, but the line had already gone dead. The tension in the lobby was suffocating. Lisa placed the phone down with shaky hands, her fingers twitching as she tried to compose herself. Andrew had turned noticeably pale, his jaw clenched, his bravado completely drained. Sarah inhaled sharply, smoothing out her blazer, then turned her gaze to Jaden, who was still standing there, his expression unreadable. "You should have just told us who your mother was," Sarah said, her voice strained, attempting to regain control of the situation. Jaden let out a short, humorless laugh, shaking his head. "And why should that have mattered?" he shot back. "Would you have treated me differently if I had?" Sarah opened her mouth, but for the first time since the conversation started, she had no response. 10 minutes later, the atmosphere in the bank had shifted into something close to sheer panic. Employees whispered among themselves, tension thick in the air as they anticipated the arrival of Charlotte Carter. Even customers, sensing that something big was happening, had begun murmuring amongst themselves, watching the doors like spectators waiting for the main event. Then, the glass doors swung open. Charlotte Carter stepped inside, her heels clicking against the polished marble floors with a quiet authority that commanded attention. She wasn't alone. Flanking her were 2 executive board members from Jefferson National Bank's headquarters and a senior security officer, all wearing expressions of quiet but unmistakable fury. Sarah, Lisa, and Andrew visibly stiffened. Employees stood straighter, and even some of the customers instinctively moved back, making way for the woman who had just turned their world upside down. Charlotte didn't pause. She walked straight to the counter where Jaden still stood and placed a hand on his shoulder, her sharp gaze locking on to Sarah. "Where's the footage?" Sarah hesitated, then glanced at one of the employees near the security office, giving a stiff nod. Within moments, the bank's surveillance footage was pulled up onto a nearby monitor. A few clicks later, the last 2 hours of transactions began to play in real time. And there it was. A white businessman greeted immediately, ushered into a private office without delay. An elderly white woman taken straight to a teller, deposit completed within minutes. The Hispanic man interrogated, his papers scrutinized before he was finally allowed to cash his check. A middle-aged black woman, waiting significantly longer than the others. glancing around uncomfortably as customers who arrived after her were served first. And then, of course, Jayden, standing at the counter. The looks of doubt, the exchanged glances, the refusal of service. It was all there, in high definition. Charlotte's expression didn't change as she turned back to face Sarah. "This," she said, pointing at the screen, "is systemic discrimination." "Mrs. Carter," Sarah started, her voice desperate now. "You're fired." Sarah froze. So did Andrew. So did Lisa. The words hit like a hammer, reverberating through the entire bank. "You all are," Charlotte continued, her voice calm but unyielding. "Effective immediately. Clear out your desks." Sarah's mouth opened, closed, opened again, but no words came out. Andrew let out a breath, his shoulders slumping as the weight of reality set in. Lisa looked like she might cry, but she said nothing. There was nothing left to say. The entire branch remained eerily silent as Charlotte turned back to the customers and employees who had been watching. From this moment forward, Jefferson National Bank will undergo a complete restructuring of our customer service policies. Every employee will be required to undergo anti-discrimination training, and every transaction will be monitored for fairness. If we claim to serve our communities, then we will serve all of them. A few beats of silence. Then, applause. Not just from Jayden, not just from the executives, but from customers, a postal worker, a black mother holding the hand of her young son, a Hispanic father who had been waiting in line far too long, a white woman in a business suit who had watched the entire thing unfold and seemed to realize, maybe for the first time, that change was necessary. Jayden looked up at his mother, pride swelling in his chest. Charlotte met his gaze, gave his shoulder a small squeeze, then turned back to the stunned employees. "You assumed my son didn't belong here," she said, her voice steady. "But let me make something clear. He belongs everywhere." The weight of Charlotte Carter's words lingered in the air, heavy and undeniable. The stunned silence inside Jefferson National Bank stretched, broken only by the quiet murmurs of customers and employees, absorbing what had just happened. Jayden stood beside his mother, watching as Sarah Whitmore, Andrew, and Lisa processed their fate. Their expressions shifted between shock, anger, and, finally, the crushing realization that there was no escaping accountability. They had made their decisions, had wielded their power carelessly, and now there was nothing left to do but face the consequences. A security guard stepped forward, clearing his throat as he motioned towards Sarah. "Ma'am, I'll need you to collect your belongings." Sarah stiffened, her fingers twitching at her sides, but she nodded. Without a word, she turned on her heel and strode toward her office, her shoes clicking loudly against the marble floor. Andrew, still pale, gave Charlotte a fleeting, almost pleading glance before following. Lisa hesitated for just a moment longer, her lips parted as if searching for words. An excuse, an apology, something, but in the end she simply lowered her head and walked away. Charlotte exhaled, the fire in her eyes cooling just enough for her to refocus on the bigger picture. She turned to the branch employees, who remained, their faces still tense with uncertainty. "For those of you who are still here," she said, her voice firm but measured, "this is your wake-up call. What happened today is unacceptable, and it will never happen again." She motioned toward one of the board members who had accompanied her. "Starting immediately, every branch of Jefferson National Bank will be implementing a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination. All employees, regardless of position, will be required to undergo extensive training in customer service equity. Every transaction will be monitored for patterns of bias, and customers will have direct access to report mistreatment." A murmur rippled through the staff, and one young woman, an assistant manager named Rebecca, hesitantly raised her hand. "Mrs. Carter," she began, her voice careful, "what about those of us who weren't involved? I mean, I didn't—" She faltered, uncertain. Charlotte studied her, then let out a quiet sigh. "Not speaking up is part of the problem too," she said. "I'm not here to punish people for fear, but silence enables discrimination just as much as direct action does. This isn't just about one branch, it's about a culture that's been tolerated for too long. That ends now." Rebecca nodded slowly, as if processing the weight of that truth. Charlotte turned back to her board members. "We'll be rolling out an independent oversight committee to review hiring, promotions, and customer service trends. This isn't just about training. It's about accountability." She shifted her attention to the customers who had stayed to watch the entire ordeal unfold. "For anyone who has experienced unfair treatment in this bank, I want you to know, you are seen, and I promise you, this institution will be worthy of your trust again." A few heads nodded in approval. The postal worker, who had been standing quietly in the back, crossed his arms and gave a slow, approving nod. A Hispanic father who had been waiting with his young daughter smiled faintly, though there was still a trace of skepticism in his eyes. Charlotte knew that trust wouldn't be rebuilt in a single day, but she also knew that actions, real, tangible change, would speak louder than any promise she could make. Jayden had been standing silently through it all, absorbing every word, every shift in the atmosphere. He had walked into this bank excited to take his first step toward financial independence, and instead, he had found himself at the center of something much bigger. He looked up at his mother now, admiration shining in his eyes. "You really are a force of nature," he murmured. Charlotte chuckled, wrapping an arm around his shoulders. "I had a good reason to be today," she replied. With the immediate crisis handled, the energy in the bank began to shift. Some employees exchanged cautious glances, as if recalibrating their own understanding of what working at Jefferson National Bank would mean moving forward. Customers continued their transactions, though the tension in the air had not yet fully dissipated. Jayden's hands tightened around the envelope still in his grasp. He turned back toward the counter, stepping up to a different teller, a young black woman named Denise, who had watched the events unfold with quiet but obvious discomfort. Denise met his gaze with something like regret in her expression. "I'm really sorry about what happened," she said softly. Jayden nodded, appreciating the sincerity in her voice, but he didn't dwell on it. "I'd like to deposit my money now," he said, placing the envelope in front of her. Denise offered a small, genuine smile and nodded. "Of course." She tapped on the keyboard, quickly pulling up his account. "Everything looks good," she confirmed. "Would you like a receipt?" Jayden exhaled, relief washing over him. "Yes, please." For the first time that day, the process felt normal. Just a boy making a deposit. No suspicions, no judgment, no unnecessary questions. When Denise handed him the printed receipt, Jayden glanced down at it for a moment, then looked back up at her. "Thank you," he said, and he meant it. Charlotte placed a hand on his shoulder again, gently steering him toward the exit. As they stepped outside, the cool Chicago air wrapped around them, carrying away some of the weight of the last hour. Jayden looked up at the towering glass building that housed the bank, reflecting the sky in its pristine surface. It looked unchanged, but he knew better. Change had already begun. As they walked toward the car, Charlotte's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, her brows lifting slightly. "Well," she murmured, tilting it so Jayden could see the caller ID. It was a number from a national news station. Jayden raised an eyebrow. "They want to comment, don't they?" he asked. Charlotte smirked. Probably. Stories like this don't stay quiet for long. Jaden thought about that for a moment. He had never sought attention, never wanted to be the face of anything. But as he replayed the events of the day in his mind, he realized something. This wasn't just about him. This was about every customer who had been ignored, interrogated, or dismissed because they didn't look like they belonged. This was about the Hispanic man who had been questioned for no reason, the elderly black woman who had waited too long, the young girl who would walk into a bank someday and expect fairness, not suspicion. Maybe, just maybe, his story could help make sure that happened. Charlotte was watching him carefully. "You want to say something?" she asked. Jaden took a deep breath, then nodded. "Yeah," he said. "I think I do." Charlotte grinned. "Good, because the world needs to hear it." She answered the call, and as she spoke, Jaden stood beside her, looking out over the city, the streets, the buildings, the people, the life that pulsed all around him. He didn't know what the future would hold, but one thing was certain. This was only the beginning.